Hello and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Dice, and today I want to make a video response to a video that my friend Lee, Humble GM, made. So we are going to talk and do a follow-up on his talk about dungeons and why they can be, well, a bit of a pain.
Whoa!
So, in his video, Lee, the Humble GM, says that he doesn't really kind of enjoy dungeons and he finds them a bit of a pain. I've gamed with Lee over a number of years, and I've gamed with a lot of people over a number of years, and I have to say, I kind of share his opinion. The generic dungeon crawl is a staple of a lot of fantasy games, in particular D&D and games that were inspired by D&D. They definitely have that sort of lean towards the dungeon. But a lot of roleplay games and pre-generated adventures, when you actually look at the maps and the descriptions and the way the dungeons are laid out, they get quite procedural and mechanical. I've seen some that are like trees. You almost go in, they branch out, and then you've got to come back through. And it's very forced. I mean, some groups do just want to play kill the monsters, get the loot. And to them, a dungeon is... they don't mind. Some of us may remember that Games Workshop and MB Games made a board game back in the 90s called Hero Quest, and that was very much a procedural dungeon where you went through in a particular route, and occasionally there was a secret passage towards the end of it to take you back to the start. But mostly you went in through a series of rooms and then back out again. And I think that's part of the reason why dungeons can be quite frustrating. I would say that, you know, because they are a staple of the genre, every so often you're going to want to do them. But how do you do them without falling into all of the incredibly generic pitfalls that dungeons have? I suppose the first and most obvious thing is, look at real-world inspiration. You know, what's the dungeon for? If a dungeon is part of, say, the ruins of a castle, go and look at castles. Go and look at how medieval construction was and how medieval warfare was thought. If your game is an archaeological game in the style of Indiana Jones, and you're in ancient Egypt, then have a look at diagrams and explanations as to how the Egyptians laid out the chambers. If you're dealing with a much more fantasy-rich setting with interesting races like orcs and goblins or ratmen or whatever it is, read up the game lore about what it says about these races and their societies. Try and think about who, because invariably somebody makes their homes in these disused catacombs or tunnels. If somebody were to live there, how does their society live? What fits their needs? There's nothing worse than having a generic dungeon full of a variety of generic monsters that may or may not get along, and actually it just feels forced. One of the best examples I ever saw of how ridiculous dungeons get is, and I'm sure you've seen this as well, the situation where players go into a room and the room is massive and there's a dragon in there, but the corridor is tiny, and so somebody actually turned around and said to the dragon, well, how did you get in here? And this actually happened to some players I know, and the response was, well, you see, there's a very good explanation for that. It's called Shut the Fuck Up. Which is hilariously funny at the time, but when you really think about it, that's kind of just a simple hand wave. Different things work for different groups, but dungeons should be as well thought out as any other part of the game. There's nothing worse than having a GM or a setting that has a really well-defined town that'll tell you if you go to the docks are in the South District, and in the northeast there's like a rundown, dilapidated part of town that's taken over by the local thieves guild, and everything in between, like all the taverns and shops and stuff. And then you go to a dungeon and it's just, this is a generic dungeon. That's kind of a cop-out. A more characterful, invested environment will definitely be more rewarding for the players and for you as a GM. If as a GM you're telling the same generic paint by numbers gameplay with dungeons, it's boring. And this is where I think Humble GM's point is that dungeons become boring if they're all you ever encounter. I suppose if you have to use dungeons, use them sparingly. Don't fill your game with them, casually sprinkle them into the game world, and take time to make them interesting, to make logical layout with them, and add a bit of history as to why the dungeon is there and how it came to be. And suddenly, those rare encounters at dungeons suddenly become characterful and interesting. Ultimately, for me as a player and as a GM, and I know Humble GM shares the same opinion, is that narrative is what makes things interesting. So a dungeon is an opportunity to add more narrative. Try it. Go. Less is more, I suppose, is the philosophy here, really. By doing that, by having a game that has occasional dungeons and then has, forest encounters, random ambushes on the road, troubles in town, because you never know when the local thieves guild might suddenly decide they want to rob you of all that hard-earned treasure, or that you have to go and deal with a gang or possibly a marauding band of mercenaries. And then by weaving these different situations in, you'll find a much more rewarding and diverse setting. That's my thoughts on dungeons and how to maximise on them by minimising on them, which may sound weird, but trust me on this. Hopefully that's kind of given you some food for thought and new approaches to look at an old problem. If you found that helpful, then give the video a thumbs up. And as always, you can subscribe and hit the subscription button just down here to see what new videos I put out in the next kind of weeks and months. If you want to hear me talk about other nerdy things, I do also have another YouTube channel. As always, all of the links to my other channel and to social media will all be in the description below. Until the next video, I'll let you get back to your rolling dice. See you soon.